It's Thursday, February 21st, and I'm your host, Paula Hersey. On Barnstable Today, we take the trail less traveled, discover wildlife education with natural resources, and explore the historical structures in the path of climate change. First up, municipal news and notes. This past Tuesday morning, West Barnstable Fire Department responded to a fire outside of a home on Acorn Drive. This was the fourth fire the WBFD has responded to in recent years caused by spontaneous combustion of polyurethane that was improperly disposed of. The trash bag was outside, and in this case, everyone was safe. Other homeowners have not been so lucky. Other fires have destroyed a house and damaged two other houses. Please be safe and follow the disposal instructions on the can. The threat of fire is real. In 1993, the Barnstable County Commissioners hatched a plan to create a regional system of trails from one end of the Cape to the other. Dubbed the Cape Cod Pathways, the concept was to connect the Cape Cod National Seashore with the Cape's wooded interior, historic villages, and remaining backcountry. We hiked out to Barnstable to learn more. Contrary to popular belief, you don't stop hiking when it's winter. It's a cold day out here at the Cape Cod Pathways. With me, Will from Barnstable Land Trust. This is a beautiful day. A little cold.
A little bit. Yep.
So, Cape Cod Pathways, first tell us a little bit about what you do at the Barnstable Land Trust.
So I'm the land stewardship coordinator for the Barnstable Land Trust. Basically what I do is I manage the land. We have 160 properties, 1,100 acres of land. All over the town of Barnstable, and I manage the properties. We maintain trails, we build platforms to view ponds, and we just, we provide public access to our properties in multiple different ways as well.
What a fascinating job. Keeps you outside, so you seem to be, not that cold like I am. But this time of year is a beautiful time to get on the trails, less traveled. And we're standing in front of a Cape Cod Pathways trail right now. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the Cape Cod Pathways, it was an idea initially formed by the county commissioners in 1993. Basically what they wanted was a linkage of trail systems all around Cape Cod to get people out on the land to enjoy the land, to enjoy trails in a long distance format, as well as short distance format. So, that's the beauty of long distance trails. You can get out for 30 minutes or you can get out for 5 hours.
Wow, and the Cape Cod Pathways, we're standing up behind the Coast Guard Museum, and I had not known about this. So tell us about this path here.
Yeah, so this path right here, it's about 1 mile, right behind Trazer Museum in Barnstable Village. It's a simple trail. It runs north-south, just through some woodlands. It actually goes over some train tracks as well. There's definitely a couple of vernal pools, a beautiful stone wall that runs through the property, and it just offers a lot in a very short distance hike.
That's great. And one of the things that we're doing out here today is we want to let people know that our Land Acquisition and Preservation Committee, in conjunction with Barnstable Land Trust, are looking for volunteers. You can't maintain all of this all by yourself.
Right. So in the town of Barnstable, Cape Cod Pathways, there's 21 miles of trails. And, over the past couple of years, we've been trying to revitalize the Cape Cod Pathways in the town of Barnstable. And, we've done things like install 14 brand new map kiosks, like the one behind you. We've installed and put up various trail blazes, painted blazes as well, and just done trail maintenance. But now what we want to do is we want to get volunteers out to monitor the trail, all of the trails. And what I've done is I've divided up the trails into 11 different volunteer sections. And we want to get at least one volunteer on each of these 11 sections, or a group of volunteers. And basically what the work consists of is going out to monitor your volunteer trail section, and use a field sheet that focuses on things like illegal dumping, if there's litter, if there's trail overgrowth, what is the condition of the kiosks and things like that. And there's no manual labor or anything like that. It's just simply bringing a field sheet out with a clipboard. You get to enjoy the trail. have fun, and then also, contribute and give back to the town and the community.
Right, and what I really like about this volunteer position is anybody can do it, and this is a great one for families.
Exactly. Yeah,
right?
yeah. So I actually just had a new volunteer reach out via email, and she basically said that her and her 9-year-old son come out and they love hiking the trails. So, there are 2 new volunteers right there.
Right, right. Perfect time for getting your kids to understand conservation and how important it is to their town. How do people get involved with this, Will?
Yeah, so it's pretty simple. You can give us a call at our office, or you can, reach me via email. Our office number is 508-771-2585, or you can send me an email at will@blt.org.
What do you have for tips for winter hiking? A hat.
Definitely a hat. So I'm not wearing a hat right now, but you got to wear a hat.
Yeah.
A lot of layers. And, you definitely you still need water in the winter.
Okay.
That's very important. But yeah, just layers. Proper footwear, definitely. And definitely wool socks. That's the key.
That's the key. Wool socks. Keep your feet warm and dry.
Exactly.
Can't feel right if your feet are uptight.
Right.
Thank you. Foxes, coyotes, and raptors, oh my. All these critters and more are ready to visit your school or organization. Amy Croto, Natural Resource Officer, joins us with her feathered friends. Amy, welcome, and welcome to all the friends at the table.
Thank you for having me.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about what's natural in our backyard for feathered friends and some of the other animals, critters that are out there, and then how people can get your educational program to their organization.
Sure. So back in 2013, our department was looking for a way to expand our educational outreach. We have our Terrapin Head Start program, we have our Learn to Shellfish classes, and we saw a gap where there are a lot of people that recognize that they have wildlife that frequents their yards, that they see when they're in conservation areas or on the beach, but they're not necessarily familiar with A, what those animals are, or B, what the normal types of behaviors are to expect out of your local wildlife. So I got a state salvage permit that allows me to have animals that die in the town of Barnstable mounted, which is your taxidermy that you see here today. And then I also carry a federal salvage permit for the animals that are covered through federal protection, say for instance our occipiters and our raptors. So we started doing talks the first year. The children of Carver Middle School were my guinea pigs, and I had 6 animals in the collection, and from there we put it out to the classrooms that participated in the Head Start program, and over the past, this is now our 6th year of doing talks, we do now close to 40 presentations a year. Yeah.
That's a lot. And just to let people know is that you need a trailer for all of your friends now to get them to all of the events that you go to.
I do. They have their own trailer. It's very posh for a bunch of mounted animals that are no longer with us, and I have 23 animals currently in the collection.
I was just going to ask, 23 animals.
Yeah.
And again, they range from feathered
Yes.
to fur.
Yes.
So what are some of the, we'll leave these guys for the end because the snowies are out there right now.
Sure.
But the furred friends, your animals, what do you have in that collection?
So we've covered our local wild canines in that we have an adult and a juvenile coyote mounted, as well as 2 red fox, one that is in summer coat and one that's in winter coat. We've got almost a complete collection of mustelids, which are our local weasels. We have a river otter, an American mink, a fisher, often called a fisher cat, even though it's not a feline. And I do have a short-tailed weasel that was given to me by the town manager that is currently at the taxidermist. We've covered our, what I consider to be frequent offenders of backyards, and that we have a raccoon, a striped skunk, a possum, notorious for being North America's only marsupial, and we have a gray squirrel and a chipmunk. And then we get into our birds, which, for my raptors, I have in the hawk family an osprey. A lot of people don't know that they're actually hawk, but they are. A red-tailed hawk, a sharp-shinned hawk, a juvenile Cooper's hawk. And then we have in our owl category our snowy owl here today. We have a great horned owl, a barred, B-A-R-R-E-D owl, and a screech owl in the collection.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what
it's
about
pretty
this
extensive.
guy?
So
He
this
looks like
guy,
a penguin.
he does, yes. So he is called a thick-billed murre, M-U-R-R-E, often called a little auk. And they come down, we're the southernmost of their range. They live in the Arctic for most of the year. And then they'll come down here in their non-breeding season, which is our wintertime, in search of additional food and resources. They're related to the puffin, actually.
Ah.
Yeah, and extremely good divers. They can dive to about 600 feet and can hold their breath for about 3 minutes or so. So for a small little bird, that's pretty outstanding. But they're terrible at taking flight. You might notice that their wings are much better suited for helping them propel through the water than getting physically up into the air. So you need about a mile of open water in order to take flight.
A mile.
Yes, a mile. Yeah, it's a long runway. A cormorant needs about 50 to 70 feet in order to get their little awkward bodies up into the sky.
Yeah, that's what I thought
So
the head looked like.
very long runway for these guys.
So when you go out to schools and senior centers and other organizations and events, what are you hoping that people are learning about your exhibits?
So there's a couple of things. So for the older people who may be homeowners, it's learning how to coexist with your local wildlife, learning that there are restrictions in what we will do as a department regarding wildlife that you might consider a nuisance even though it may not potentially be. Learning what your normal behaviors are of your local wildlife and sort of gaining a general respect for the fact that your backyard is in fact the home of these animals oftentimes, and that we can all kind of share and live together. And with the kids, I mean, a lot of it, the time is just getting them to know the basic identifications of the animals at a younger age, and as they get older, they fit it into their curriculum for animal adaptations, which sort of shows you, how each animal fits an individual niche in our ecosystem.
That's fantastic. And when you go into the classrooms, what seems to be the animal or the bird that kids really gravitate towards?
I would like to say that there's one, but pretty much everybody has their own favorite. And it does vary, but by and large, in the beginning, and probably since it's been in the program since its inception, the coyote gets a lot of traction and a lot of appreciation from people.
Yeah, coyotes always getting information, in the news at this time of year as well, because everybody hears them much clearer on a winter's night than they do in the summer.
It's breeding season,
It's breeding
so
season,
that
yeah.
is what it is. They're noisy right now.
They're noisy right now. So how can people get this exhibit to their organization or to their event?
Sure. So we offer these to classrooms, to libraries. We do programs at the senior center, and for clubs and organizations, nonprofits. We do expos, similar to Community Day, where you have hundreds of people coming through. And if anyone is interested in having a presentation, they can schedule it directly with me, and you can give me a call at the office, 508-790-6272, or you can email me. I'm very email user friendly at amy.croto, C-R-O-T as in Tom, E-A-U, at town.barnstable.ma.us.
That was really long.
It is, yes. We like long email addresses here in town.
We certainly do. And is it restricted to just the town of Barnstable, or can any school or library?
So any school or library can ask us to do a presentation, but because they're out of town, it has to cover my time, which is travel to and from, the amount of time that it takes to set up the presentation and break it down, and then the actual time for the presentation, and that's charged on an overtime basis. So if anyone's interested, definitely contact me for more details.
Excellent. Thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Thank you.
With sea levels rising, more historic structures will be impacted in Barnstable and across Cape Cod. Cape Cod Commission Historic Preservation Specialist Sarah Korjeff joins us in studio to tell us more about an initiative to inventory all the historic structures in floodplains in the region.
There's so many things to think about with climate adaptation, mitigation, but what about our historical structures? With me today, Sarah Korjeff from the Cape Cod Commission. You're a historical preservationist.
That's right. So my title is Preservation Specialist and Planner at the Cape Cod Commission, and my job really is to work with all 15 towns in the county on ways to protect their historic resources. And that could be historic buildings, or it could be cemeteries, or it could be cultural landscapes, or even artifacts. So I work with a lot of nonprofits and town committees to try to find ways to make sure that we don't lose these important resources.
Right, and there's so much history on Cape Cod, especially with our structures. You know, we have some of the oldest structures here in the country, you know, having, you know, the Pilgrims did land here first. But let's talk a little bit about the initiative that you're working on right now, which is to inventory these structures. So give us a little background of how this initiative started.
Sure. Well, for a long time, people have tried to maintain a list of the historic properties in their towns. And Mass Historical Commission actually maintains a statewide list of inventoried historic properties. There's a special form that people can fill out that they then have access to online, or the state puts online so people can use it as a research tool. But a lot of inventory has been done on the Cape, but we know that there are many historic properties that haven't yet been inventoried. So what we're hoping to do is fill in those holes, either working with towns or some local historical commissions specifically to get them to address an area that we know hasn't been touched, or for us to actually go out, commission staff to go out and try to make sure that areas that haven't been inventoried in the past are inventoried now, or maybe ones that were inventoried, you know, 40 or 50 years ago, that we check them again and make sure that the inventory is up to date and that we've actually captured all of the important buildings that are out there.
All right. So let's start a little bit with the floodplain issues that we're facing as we get superstorms and as sea levels rising with this climate change. How is this impacting, or how is this making your job a little more, I guess, harder to challenging? Yes, challenging to do.
Yeah, well, I think everybody knows that we've been experiencing more storms, and we've seen a lot of coastal erosion. And for example, in Provincetown recently, we've seen a lot more inundation, you know, water actually coming in away from just the edge, the actual coastline, and impacting historic buildings. And so we've been trying to make the issue of historic properties in the flood zone one that people can pay more attention to, and we're trying to increase education and information about that. So as part of that, we've actually put out a series of maps that look at how many historic properties on Cape Cod we have inventoried and how many of those are impacted by flood hazards. Our first map shows about 11,000 properties on Cape Cod that are historic and have been inventoried. And they, the map we show color codes it a little bit so that the darkest color blue is showing us where the oldest properties are, so that would be pre-1800 properties. And then, and I guess no surprise that those kind of follow Route 6A and some other really common transportation corridors that we know have been around for a long time. But then as the colors get a little more purpley and a little lighter blue, then those are the 1800s and the early 1900s. So out of those 11,000 properties that have been inventoried, we know actually that there are, or we're pretty certain that there are significantly more, because we know there are whole sections of the Cape that haven't been inventoried or that haven't been inventoried recently. But even if we look at that 11,000, and then we say, okay, well, how many of those properties are in flood hazard areas? We come up with roughly 2,300 properties, or about 20% of that 11,000 number, are historic buildings that could be impacted by flood hazards, and that's a big number, and that's a lot of people who would be concerned. And this is just historic properties. Of course, we know there are others that are not historic that are going to be impacted too.
Right.
But part of the reason for calling out historic properties is because there are some special regulations for them. Normally, when you make a substantial improvement to your property, you're required, if you're in a flood zone, to actually elevate it and lift it up several feet above base flood elevation. But if you're a significant historic property listed on the National Register of Historic Places, then you actually don't necessarily have to elevate. You can look for other ways to protect the building from flood hazards. And there are a lot of different ideas out there that people are using in different countries and also in different cities around the U.S. But some of them involve flood-proofing the lower levels of the building or building some kind of a physical barrier immediately around the structure to protect it, or if we're talking about whole neighborhoods or districts, potentially creating barriers that would prevent floodwaters from entering an entire area.
Wow, it's fascinating to know that there's that many structures for one thing, and that there are some that probably have not been cataloged. But right here in Barnstable, that comes to mind for me is Sandy Neck. I mean, those are
That's
probably
right.
about 100 years old, right?
Yeah, or more even. So late 1800s is the date for a lot of the
Yeah.
Sandy Neck properties. And actually, that's one of the places that we looked specifically as an example. We picked a couple across the Cape to try to illustrate just how significant the problem is.
Right.
And Sandy Neck, we have a group of historic properties there. And not only are they inventoried, but they're also on the National Register of Historic Places. So we know they meet that certain level of significance. And there we have put together a series of maps, one that is sort of a bird's eye view that shows in red where the buildings are on the land. And then there's sort of a dotted line that shows the outline of the National Register Historic District. So all the little red building footprints you see there, those are all buildings that are recognized on the National Register of Historic Places. Of course, it includes the lighthouse and most of the other buildings we're used to seeing there. But then if you overlay a map of the flood zones, the flood hazard areas there, you can see that every single one of those buildings would be underwater. And I'm not saying completely underwater, but they would be impacted by water. And so looking at what do we do with a situation like that, how can we help these folks prepare for the future? And there's, as I said earlier, there's a lot of different possibilities. But we don't think that just lifting the buildings up in the air is necessarily going to be the best long-term solution for all of them. In some cases, some of these buildings along our coastlines have been moved there from another location way back when we didn't realize it was so common to move buildings. And so to a certain extent, we need to think about whether moving them again to higher ground is a good solution. So that's that'll be a trick. But there's a lot to consider.
So you've inventoried, I believe, is it Yarmouth so far in this initiative?
Well, so we've been doing some inventory work in Yarmouth, actually updating just 41 properties in South Yarmouth, looking to make sure that, so these are buildings that are in the South Yarmouth Historic District, and not all of them were even impacted by the flood zone, but they're properties that we knew hadn't been inventoried for a very long time, and we wanted to make sure that both the buildings and the outbuildings were up to date. And I think it's really just kind of a pilot to see whether we can, in small doses, do improved inventories like this with modest amounts of money, bringing in consultants in this case to do the work, though in some cases we may bring in just knowledgeable individuals or have commission staff do some of the work.
Right. How do residents kind of get involved in this? Like, there's a whole lot of folks with historic houses, right? So do they know that they're on this inventory already, or do they need to contact the commission? Is there a form or someplace that they can go to find out more about this?
Sure. Well, probably they might or might not know that their property's been inventoried. I'd like to think that most people would know, but probably the easiest place to find out is to go to the Mass Historical Commission website, and they have what's called the MACRIS database, and it stands for Massachusetts Cultural Resource Inventory. And there you can actually search by your town and your street address and pull up and find out whether there is a historic inventory form already on file for you. What may even be easier for a lot of folks is to contact their local historical commission. And you can start at town hall or on the town website to figure out how to do that. And chances are really good that your town actually has copies of all this data too on their own GIS database. And And that's a good way to get started. And then look at the date. How long ago was your inventory done? Is it somewhat recent, in the last 10, 20 years, or is it really old and maybe doesn't have a whole lot of information? That may be an area where we're looking to do some updated inventory. But I also want to sort of look ahead to the future and acknowledge that the flood areas we have today aren't going to be static. I mean, it will change over time, and our friends at Barnstable County Extension and Woods Hole Sea Grant have actually done a projection for the town of Barnstable, looking at the number of properties that are in flood hazard areas now. And then they looked at a slightly different data set. I think they looked at pre-1900 properties. So they came up with 193 inventoried historic buildings that are in flood hazard areas today. But then when they projected forward where they anticipate those hazard areas will be by 2075, they came up with 73% more historic properties that would be impacted, so over 300. So we're really going to be looking to improve inventories, not just in the hazard areas, but even outside.
Even outside, my goodness. Absolutely fascinating work. I can't wait to see as you progress with this initiative, what more you may come up with. I mean, are you finding things that are somewhat surprising to you as you're going through these inventories, or is it, oh yes, we knew this?
I think we're always surprised when we find a building that hasn't been inventoried yet, when people have been thinking about historic structures here for, I don't know, maybe 75 years and have been doing inventories for about 50. So it's always a little bit of a surprise that this place has snuck through the cracks, and we want to understand why, but I think we're excited when we can actually get that information out there as a research tool, and hopefully at the same time bring in more people and help them understand that we're not just looking to gather this information for ourselves, but also to help people understand the significance of their properties and get them excited about what options they have for protecting it in the long term.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming, Sarah.
Thanks for having me, Paula.
Here is a look at things to do, places to go, and people to meet. Are you looking for something different to do with the kids on vacation this week? Museums, music, galleries, theater, and more can be found at artsbarnstable.com. Step out of the video game box and experience all the arts have to offer here in the town of Barnstable and the Cape Cod region. Comments, suggestions, accolades? Connect with us on Facebook or Instagram, email us, or send us an old-fashioned note by carrier pigeon. Channel 18 works for you. I'm Paula Hersey, and thank you for watching Barnstable Today.